Hey there, welcome to the channel. My name's Greg. Today I'm going to show you how I made this Polish smoked salami. This salami is another one I'm making out of this book, The Art of Making Fermented Sausages by Stanley and Adam Mariansky. I highly recommend this book. There's a lot of information in here to help you make better salamis and make sure you're doing it safely. So let's take a look at this recipe. This is the traditional method for making Polish salami. Although salami is of Italian origin, almost every country has its own version, and Poland is no exception. The following is the official Polish government recipe for making this sausage that comes from 1956 archives. This recipe calls for 40% pork, 30% beef, and 30% pork back fat. It's a pretty short list of ingredients: salt, cure number 2, pepper, cardamom, and sugar. So it doesn't say if it's black or white pepper. And right off the bat, I'm noticing there's no starter culture. That's very interesting for a salami. I've never made a salami without a starter culture. Step 1, cut meat into 5 to 6 centimeter, 2-inch pieces. Mix with 2/3 of the salt, sugar, and cure number 1. Cure number 1, the list of ingredients said cure number 2. But it calls for twice as much cure number 2, 0.5%. Every other salami recipe I've ever seen calls for 0.25%, 0.25%. Stick to the recipe here. Place in a slightly raised container with holes in the bottom to allow for draining of curing liquid. It says to elevate this in my bowl, so what I'm going to do is put it right into this strainer. And that way it'll drain any of the curing liquid. So that's my pork and beef mixture. This is going to be a fatty salami. It didn't specify lean pork, lean beef. I did use some ham, which is a little leaner, but it has some fat in it. Leave for 5 days at 2 to 4 degrees Celsius, 35 to 40 degrees Fahrenheit. All right, well, I'm going to cover these and I'm going to refrigerate them for 5 days. Cut back fat into strips. Rub in 1/3 of the salt. Back fat does not require nitrite and can be kept separately at 2 to 4 degrees Celsius, 35 to 40 degrees Fahrenheit. Step 2, grind pork with 5mm plate, grind beef with 3mm plate. My smallest plate is 4.5mm and my next one up is 7mm. So I'm going to do my pork with the 7mm and the beef with the 4.5mm. So I can still get a finer grind on the beef. Did lose some water, not water, but meat juice. Thing is I'm supposed to grind my beef through a finer die than the pork. So I guess now I got to separate these. All right, that's obviously pork, that's beef. It's all darkened up quite a bit. I'm gonna stick this in my freezer for 30 or 40 minutes, something like that. Let it firm up before I grind it. I've had my meat in the freezer for a while. I've had these in overnight. You can see they're nice and frosty cold. I'm gonna go in with my pork first using my 7mm grinding disc. Then I'll take some, run that back through. That'll push out the rest. That on tight so nothing tries to leak around the side. Now I'll grind my beef through my 4.5mm die. And again, take a small little handful, run it back through, helps push out the rest. Slice of bread works really good for that too. Just don't feel like sacrificing any of my bread right now. Manually cut back fat into 5mm pieces. So I put this in my freezer because I knew it would just be too soft to work with if it wasn't a little chilled. They are firmed up just from the salt. Mix meats with spices and back fat. Do not add water. Easy enough. Not many spices in this salami, pretty much 2. So I'm using black pepper. I'm going to toast these up, putting them in a cold pan. Toasting them and just get a little more flavor out of them. Cardamom is the other spice going in. Very basic spice profile. Once I could just barely smell these, I ground them up. And now we're ready to go. I'm gonna get my liners on. This is gonna help keep my farce, that's what you call a sausage batter. It's gonna help keep it cold. It's gonna help keep my hands from becoming numb and painful. Down to 32 degrees, that's great. I like it to be below 35 when I mix. I've had my pork fat in the freezer as well. So now I'm just gonna go in with this small amount of black pepper and cardamom. It says quite clearly no water, so I won't add any water. So this is interesting. It's got 3 different textures. You got your very coarse fat, which I probably could have cut smaller. You've got your fine beef and your slightly more coarse pork. I'm starting to see it, starting to see the strands just a little bit. See, starts to get just little bits of strands, starting to get some protein extraction. Just lifting my bowl, I know I'm getting close. Sticking in my hand pretty good. It's lifting up the bowl pretty good. You can see it's got strands reaching out. So we're ready for the stuffer. Step 4, stuff into 55 to 60 millimeter beef middle casings. Do not add water. Make links 16 to 18 inches long. The ends tied up with twine, 10 to 12 centimeter, 4 to 5 inch hanging loop on one end. I'm not using the beef middles. I find that these dry salami is much slower and I just like the end result better. Plus the fibrous casings are way more cost effective. Highly recommend buying them pre-tied, cost the same, and well, you don't have to deal with 2 knots per. Let's load that in there and try to push out any air. Air is the enemy when it comes to sausages. And oddly enough, we need air to live, but oddly the oxygen is also what's going to kill us all. Stuffer is full, ready for casing. I forgot to turn the camera on. I've done this knot in several videos, my sopressata video, the calabrese. It's just a knot that creates this little bubble here, this little nub, so that when you hang it, the tension's on that. Instead of it sliding off, it's got this little bit to bite onto. So what I'm gonna do, gonna lube up my horn. I hate doing this on camera. It always seems wrong. Get the meat to the end. Should be using my bigger horn. Grab the wrong one. This'll work. Just have to be careful not to let any air get back up it. And put a couple holes in this end so any air that is trapped in there has a place to go. And ideally, I should have used my bigger horn. Like I was saying, always want to use the biggest horn that your casing fits on. So I'm just going to have to hold it a little more firmly than normal. I want to fill these pretty tight. Now I'm going to take this end. I'm just going to twist it up as tight as I can. And then I'll go a couple more. Now this takes a little bit of practice, but you can figure it out because you got to tie a knot and hold on to that. So you kind of have to do the knot with one hand. It's just an overhand knot with an extra pull through. And then another overhand knot just to hold that one tight. Now this could just slide right off of here. So what I gotta do is fold it over, make another knot on this side. And then an overhand knot to hold that tight. And that right there is actually the knot. Figure a little extra added insurance. I'm gonna put another knot on the back side of that little nub and just have another extra bit of insurance. Cut off this extra casing and I'll just put a knot in here so I have somewhere to hang it. Now I'll look for some air pockets. I'll put a few holes in here anyway. That'll help it dry better, help the casing stick to the meat. Definitely get any air pockets you see. Tiny bit looser on that end that I finish with. That's often the case. Sometimes I'll just try to squeeze my meat, just try to make it more even. That's feeling pretty good. Step 5. Hang for 4 days at 2 to 4 degrees Celsius, 35 to 40 degrees Fahrenheit, 85 to 90% humidity. Well, basically, they want me to keep it at refrigerator temperatures but with a high humidity. So I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to wrap this up in plastic to keep the humidity high and put that in my refrigerator. I'm going to put it on a tray and I'm going to cover it with some cling wrap. I'm going to take this piece, tiny little bit left in the hopper, going to wrap it up. Even though this doesn't have me test the pH and I'm not trying to ferment it apparently, I'm curious. So I'm going to use that to test and see what's going on. You know, if the pH drops while it's in the refrigerator, I'm guessing this is sort of a natural ferment and that it's going to drop the pH somewhat. So what I'm going to do is just cover it and hopefully that'll keep it, you know, it'll definitely keep it more humid. So hopefully that's around 85 to 90% in the range that's going to work for what we're trying to do here. Into the fridge for 4 days. Well, this Polish salami has been in the refrigerator 4 days, just like the book says. You know, I did see another recipe for a Polish salami that does use the starter culture. If this ends up not working, I'll try that one. You know, it does have the same texture as a fermented. Doesn't have quite the color change. Doesn't smell bad, doesn't really have the fermented smell that I'm used to having from a fermented one, but let's see. Curious about the pH. Again, the recipe doesn't tell me to check it, it just says refrigerate it for 4 days. I'm not really sure about that. I'm not sure how I feel. pH hasn't gone down, you know, but it doesn't really tell me to check the pH. It is from the Polish government archive. I'm following the directions. I'm a little nervous about this one, but I think I'm just gonna continue it on and I guess eventually I'll taste it. Unless it smells weird, I'll give it a go. Step 6. Hang in a dark, slightly drafty area for 6 to 8 weeks. 10 to 12 degrees Celsius, 50 to 54 degrees Fahrenheit, and 80 to 85% humidity. That's basically what my curing chamber is. It's 55 degrees Fahrenheit on average and about 80% humidity. So that should work just fine. If wet mold appears, wash it off with warm, salty water. Then wipe it dry with a clean cloth. When sausages lose about 30% weight and start developing dry mold, wipe them off and send for smoking. If wet mold appears, I'm a little scared about this. There's no culture to lower the pH, so I'm not sure what's going to happen there. And wet mold, usually a wet mold would make me really concerned about anything in my drying chamber. This is what my salami's looking like. Never did get that slimy mold it talked about. All right, 536. I had my target is 535, so we're there. I've dried this to 35% weight loss, even though the recipe calls for 30%, because I know I like my salami a little more firm. Step 7. Cold smoke with the thin smoke for 4 to 6 days until dark red color is obtained. Yield of a finished product in relation to the original weight, 63%. So that means it's dried to 37%, which, you know, that's pretty close to what I do for salami. I usually like it closer to 40, but we'll see what we do here. And that thin smoke for 4 to 6 days, that's a really long time. I think I'm just going to see how it looks. We'll see what happens here. So I've got this in the smoker. This is my 3rd continuous day, and I think I'm going to take it out because it's getting pretty mahogany. Using this smoke tube because it puts out a much thinner stream of smoke than my Smokin' It smoke generator does. Usually use the other smoke generator, but it's called for a thin stream of smoke. And I've used some apple chips right now, if you can see in there. I'm using pellets. These are cherry wood pellets because the pellets last a lot longer in this thing. Wood chips, they only last a few hours. This seems to go like 6 to 8 hours or so, it seems to go. Anyway, I'll be taking this out of here and giving it a taste as soon as this smoke tube burns up, because I think 3 days is enough. I know it said 4 to 6 days, but geez. So I didn't smoke this as long as it said to smoke it, but to me this is looking plenty smoked. It is not quite as dry as I usually make my salamis, but it's not really losing weight very much at this point. So I think I'm just going to cut it open and see what's in here. Okay, this is going to be a stubborn one, it looks like. Sometimes when they're stubborn, they just need a quick little soak in some water. Don't really want to leave it in here too long. Doesn't take much, and now it's actually peeling off quite a bit easier. It is sometimes a little trickier right on the ends because it gets that sort of wrinkly butthole look, and the casing kind of tries to stick inside of those wrinkles. But you can see with just a little bit of soaking, it does come off quite a bit easier. Now that the casing's off, we get a pretty good look at it. Interesting look with all those big pieces of fat in here. It's really about how it tastes, you know? So let's get a cut. For some reason, these big pieces of fat don't seem to be very evenly distributed. You know, it smells okay. I was a little nervous about this one because the pH thing is one of the safety hurdles. And this pH never got below 5.3. Let's see how it tastes. And more importantly, let's see if it makes me sick. Well, it's very, very smoky. I'm glad I didn't let it go any longer than I did. It's pretty smoky. It's pretty sweet. There's no bite, no tang, no acidity. Probably because there's no starter culture. It really reminds me a lot of the Bydgoszcz sausage I made. And that pretty much it's sweet and it's smoky. And I don't really get a lot of the other flavors. The smoke is really the main star of the show. Let's see if I cut down a little farther if we get more even on the chunks of fat. Oh yeah, that's better. That's more like what I was hoping to see. Much more evenly distributed in the fat right in that part of the salami. Not sure why it's so uneven in that part of the salami. A much better cross-section in that part. I like it. It's good. Like I said, it reminds me a lot of the Bydgoszcz, which really quickly became one of my favorite sausages. If you decide to make this salami, I would recommend using a starter culture just for the sake of safety. It'll help guarantee that the pH gets below 5.3, which is one of the safety hurdles for salamis. Surprisingly, this one does not use a culture, and the pH never got below 5.3. Still tastes really good, but I was nervous the whole time. Starter culture will help guarantee that you get into that safety zone of pH. TSPX is the one they recommend. It's a slow fermenter, a mild acidifier. It's going to keep the flavor pretty pure to the intent of the original salami. Not going to add a lot of tanginess that many salamis are known for. When using a culture, mix about a 1/4 teaspoon of the culture with about a 1/4 cup of fresh water. If you don't have pure clean water, get yourself some distilled water. And then you need to feed the culture by adding a simple sugar, usually dextrose. In the book, they recommend 0.3% dextrose. I would even go as low as 0.2% dextrose, just to keep that acidity as low as possible. All that being said, this is a recipe from the Polish archive. It's obviously been made for many, many years. I was going with the nose test. Doesn't smell right, throw it out. And if it gets any weird molds, I was going to throw it out. Anything black, red, yellow. But it worked out okay for me. I never even got the slimy molds it said I might get. So who knows? Every new salami is a learning experience. All of this being said, it was a good salami. I like it. Reminded me a ton of that Bydgoszcz, the cold smoked kielbasa. What more is there to say? It's a pretty looking salami. If you like this video, make sure to give it a thumbs up. If you like this kind of content, make sure you subscribe to my channel. Hit that notification bell so you don't miss anything. Put some love into the food you make. Peace.